Naturopath Podcast. We bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. Naturopath Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve success and optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for friends sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. In today's episode, we talk to Monica Shepherd. Monica is an experienced naturopath with a passion for mental health after realizing complementary medicine has so much to offer individuals, children, and families to not only function but thrive. Working through her own diagnosis with PTSD in the past further consolidated Monica's learning of the biochemistry involved in healing all aspects of the person. Monica uses simple, evidence-based approaches to treatment, including food as medicine, herbal medicine, as well as Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine practices. Monica's area of expertise includes anxiety, depression, eating disorders, OCD and ODD, PTSD, endometriosis, motor tics, ASD support, and more. Her extensive list of qualifications include a Bachelor of Complementary Medicine, Advanced Diploma in Naturopathy, Advanced Diploma of Nutritional Medicine, and Certificate 3 in Children's Services. Monica is a registered practitioner with the ANTA. Some interesting facts about Monica is that she actually ran for the federal election in 2022. She was raised as a vegan, and she does not like wearing jewelry. Welcome to the Naturopath Podcast, Monica.
What a pleasure.
That's absolutely amazing. So you were raised vegan. Was that because your family was vegan? Because as a child you decided to be vegan?
My parents were vegan and became health conscious in their own ways when I was a child. So it definitely wasn't my choice. However, you know, all the other families that we associated with and all the friends that I had were also of the same lifestyle. So I didn't know that I was essentially missing out on anything or was different to anybody else until much, much later in life. I'm not a vegan now, so I just thought I'd make that clear. I'm not saying that people can't be healthy vegans, but it's not my lifestyle choice at the moment. However, growing up that way, it's certainly easy for me to cook a lot of vegan meals and to really have my mind around nutrition and what that diet looks like too. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. What a story. So what got you to then be a naturopath? Was it the whole backstory of, you know, you being vegan, eating all these veggies, and like you said, being involved in nutrition? What then was it a dream since you were like 3 or 4 that you wanted to be a naturopath, or was it just all of a sudden after school it happened? What happened there, Monica?
That's such a good question, and unfortunately it wasn't because of a love of veggies. I would love to say that that's what led me there, but it wasn't that. In my early 20s, I was working in childcare, was a preschool group leader, and would have a variety of different children present with different behaviours. And at the time, my job was really to help them socially, emotionally, and mentally to develop those behavioural skills that would help them be ready for school life and what that entails. However, it was really clear to me that there was a lot of children who needed more support. And at the time, I thought, with the background that I had had on nutrition and growing up, you know, as I got older and I became a teenager, I would notice, hey, diet does have some impact on people's health. And a lot of people are quite unaware of that. So it kind of became down that route. And then at the time I saw a great naturopath myself, you know, working around children, my immune system was really suffering. And it put me on that pathway. I went and studied. It was a long process. There's so much to learn, and you have to change so much yourself to be able to walk the talk and become that practitioner that's going to help other people down the same pathways. One of the things that was really clear to me, though, was my direction. So even as a student, I was like, I'm going to come out of this and I want to be out there really helping people. So I spent some time at the student clinic that they offer on campus, but I also wanted to go out in the real world, find, at the time I was living in Victoria, where are some of Victoria's best naturopaths? I want to sit in with them. I want to see what they're doing practically with people and how their business runs and their treatment plans and are they getting results? And I was so blessed because the first naturopath I sat in with was also a trained psychologist and specialised in mental health. and took such a key biochemistry focus, was working with so many specialists and was getting incredible results. She was seeing really difficult cases. It was difficult being in the clinic room. She'd have some patients wanting to sit all over her, running around the clinic room. Like she really saw all these things, and my brain just lit up because I was going, wow, there are actually biochemistry issues happening in these individuals that most people are just not aware of. And it's not about getting rid of the conditions that these individuals have, but it's about helping them achieve their optimal health and their optimum potential. And that might be lower on the scale, it might be higher on the scale. It doesn't matter. We want to help them get there. And one of the things I would see a lot of is ADHD. And I quickly realized, hold on, as a society, particularly in Australian society, we don't have a good grasp on what ADHD is, who could be affected by it, and what to look for. So that's where my passion started, and it has continued to this day. And so I'm so excited to talk about this topic today with you.
Yeah, wow, Monica. So not only did you get, an education in the field, but you're like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to see the best naturopaths and I'm going to sit in and see how this works. And that's where actually everything you learnt in the books came alive in front of you, and your brain and your heart were like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to be doing.
Absolutely. I started to see solutions, and from there I spent a lot of time doing the research, because there is so much research on ADHD, and particularly in the field of complementary medicine as well. So it's not one of these conditions that is under researched. There's so much research there. It's just making the time to go through it, to learn. There's so many integrative psychiatrists now that are also all over the research as well. Where to start? Yeah, most people wouldn't even know that there would be a psychiatrist that works complementary with a naturopath, or, with a GP, or having a whole team around them. Most people would be like, what, is that even possible? I thought I could only see a psychiatrist or my psychologist for ADHD. Some people that might blow their mind, just that. Yeah, so, to be diagnosed in Australia, your GP can't diagnose you with ADHD. So like you said, you do get referred to a specialist, and that's usually a psychologist or a psychiatrist. There are all of my clients, and I can say right now, if you've already got that diagnosis of ADHD, a fantastic book to read is Finally Focused by James Greenblatt. Now, he's an integrative psychiatrist based in Canada, but he has compiled all the research nicely into a little book that shows how you can restore attention, how you can reduce hyperactivity, and how you can minimize drug side effects if that's the route that you choose to go down. So absolutely, there's also fantastic integrative psychiatrists here in Australia as well. So there are options. Now, the biggest issue, though, that we face in Australia in particular is not an overdiagnosis of ADHD, but it's a misdiagnosis. So it brings us back to our topic today of women with ADHD. And this is really important because as a society, through our media portrayal, we still tend to see ADHD as this naughty little boy running around the classroom, can't sit still, blurting out answers.
That's so true. That is so true.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because we're seeing more and more adult diagnosis, and we're seeing more and more females and women being diagnosed with ADHD. Females in general are much better at adapting to social situations and masking how they're really feeling or what's going on for them. So a typical woman who would present, and you start to put the question marks there around ADHD, is someone who is actually extremely fatigued. Believe it or not, fatigue is the number one key symptom of ADHD. because they can't concentrate on one topic, because there's so much swirling around for them, they end up so exhausted. Often they also would have had a diagnosis of anxiety, or think to themselves, I can be quite an anxious, worried person. Now, anxiety is really socially acceptable. We use it even in our everyday language, like, I'm feeling anxious, or, you're being too anxious. So we're really comfortable with it now. And it's so acceptable to have anxiety as a woman. But what often will happen is that woman is anxious, in her own words, she's exhausted. And there isn't really anything going on in her life to be anxious about. She's not really under any stress, both that's abnormal to her or that's considered high in general, like moving house, divorce, or all of those big changes. Yet she still has that overactive mind that is making her really, really tired. That puts a big question mark on my mind then. I'm going, okay, has she actually been misdiagnosed? And this is where, look, diagnosis can have a lot of benefits as well. And so if she goes back to a psychologist, to a new psychiatrist, and I say to her, this time, explain to them what you've explained to me, the exhaustion, nothing in your life that's really happening but those anxiety type feelings still being there. And more often than not, she comes back with a different diagnosis once she does the ADHD checklist of symptoms.
Yeah, wow. So let's, I love all this, Monica. Let's take it back. So the people that are listening are like, okay, ADHD, what actually is it? Because I know people hear ADHD, ADD, and then I'm going to come back to the point of diagnosis, because I love that, and I want to dig into how to get diagnosed in Australia and where to get diagnosis. But what actually is ADHD, and is there a difference when people say, ADHD or ADD?
Yeah, so the difference between ADHD and ADD is that often as children, people will present with ADHD, so the hyperactivity is there. And hyperactivity is not just running around a room, not being able to sit still. It's also being really fidgety is more common, or, tapping your toes, wriggling your fingers. Everyone's probably thinking, this is me. But, it's one of the symptoms. But as we get older, we tend to be less hyperactive because we've learnt to fit into society's, standards of how we should be, which is we need to sit still, we can't be tapping our toes, and all of
what
those
a concept
kind of
to fit into society.
Yeah. So
what a concept to fit into society. We change.
Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. So we tend to drop more of the hyperactivity, but the ADD part we can't get rid of. Our mind is still racing. It's still really difficult to finish tasks. It's really difficult to, not blurt out answers before someone's finished their conversation, and we become really impatient. Physically, though, ADD or ADHD can be a deficiency of a number of neurotransmitters. So a big neurotransmitter that I often see that's deficient in this condition is phenylalanine or phenylethylamine. It's not a neurotransmitter that most people are familiar with. We're more familiar with serotonin, the feel-good hormone, or dopamine, which is our reward center, and there can be dopamine issues in these individuals as well. But it's a deficiency in this neurotransmitter that is in the central nervous system and essentially almost has an amphetamine-like quality. It helps us have that up and go. It helps keeps us motivated. So without it, the conundrum you could say is that an ADD or ADHD individual is actually lacking their stamina or their drive, and because of that, the brain's unable to focus or be really sharp. And so you can see, issues with attention. So, listening to a whole podcast is going to be very, very difficult for someone with this condition. Reading a book, that's going to be,
I know, we should have made this podcast for like 15 minutes.
That's right. For our key audience we're targeting, this is way too long for them. Those kind of issues, yeah.
You can come back to it. You can come back.
Yeah, that's right. Memory can also be really common as well. So both short-term, both long-term memory, because it's almost like having a mind where your thoughts are like in a blender and they're going around and going around. So it's very difficult to concentrate on what happened yesterday, what happened last week, let alone years ago. That's asking a lot right now. And so what often happens, someone gets their diagnosis of ADHD, and what happens when they're on the medication or doing lifestyle, nutritional, herbal therapies as well, is because their energy comes back online, their focus comes back online, they're not as exhausted. They're able to get through a working day more effectively, through their working week more effectively, and they're able to achieve more in their life as well. So the big question we always have around diagnosis is, why get diagnosed as an adult? If you've lived your life so far with these symptoms and, managed to function as well as you can, why bother? What difference is it going to make? And the biggest difference it makes is that people are easier on themselves. They're not as hard on themselves. They can see how in the past, job issues or relationship issues, they don't blame themselves as much. They start to understand, hold on, there was a reason why that was more difficult for me than what it may have been if I compared myself to somebody else. So there's some of the reasons, but diagnosis, like a lot of health conditions, takes time. It's not always a straightforward process. Like I said before, your GP can't diagnose you. You may find some GPs, when you first present to them, are really open to ADHD, and others aren't as well, and are going to be like, what, ADHD? You want to test for that? Surely, why? But you hardly have any symptoms. And we get that kind of response as well. So I'm saying that to people because these are all the kind of responses that they could meet in the real world, unfortunately. And it can,
and especially a woman
resistance.
that's in their, let's say, mid-30s, going
Yes.
to a GP and saying, hey, I want to get tested for ADHD. You can imagine the response you would get, because it's like you said earlier, that's more of a kid's type of diagnosis, and it's so masked and underdiagnosed in women, especially as you get older. It's kind of like getting a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD in your 30s, 40s, 50s. It's like, what?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to note that a lot of women with ADD or ADHD are very successful as well. Very educated, very accomplished. They could be teachers. They could be naturopaths as well. There's some naturopaths I know with ADHD. They could be even a GP themselves. So they can be very successful and really well educated. So in that regard, we need to drop that stigma as well. But what I do find is, after diagnosis, their energy, their ability to structure their life in a way that brings them more peace, more joy, and better health is easier. And so it does have value.
Yeah.
But it does require.
So what does diagnosis
referral.
look like? Yeah, so what does diagnosis look like? Is it a blood test? Is it a brain scan? Is it as simple as a quiz and a discussion?
It's as simple as a questionnaire that you do with your psychologist, usually over more than one session though. So it's not a quick diagnosis. It's that referral from the GP to the psychologist or a psychiatrist, and then they have their checklist that will take a few visits usually. And then after that, once they've done the score, they will tell you ADD or ADHD as well. And then you're kind of left in the dark, so to speak.
Yeah, what then, Monica? Like, what then?
What then? You are essentially left in the dark. Here's this diagnosis. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get some medications. Those medications do have a lot of side effects as well. That's not.
What are the
often talked about in
medications? What would
detail.
people be given?
There's a range of different amphetamines, essentially. So they are Schedule 8 drugs. So it's difficult to change your medication once you're on ADHD medication. It's also difficult to get that medication to start with as well. And it can be a process of getting the right medication for you as well. Now, medication in general, whether it's, your standard Ritalin, which we're all a bit more familiar with, it's not going to get rid of all your symptoms. I think people need to know that. So I see a range of different people. I see some people who are not on any medication, and I see other people who are. And the reason they're still seeing a naturopath is, yes, to optimize their health and their nutrition and their lifestyle for their condition, but it's also because they've still got symptoms remaining with their medication. So the medication has helped somewhat, but perhaps they're still having memory issues would be a big one. Or perhaps they're still a bit fatigued, but not as much as they were previous to diagnosis as well.
Yeah. Do you know that medication, like you mentioned the neurotransmitter that most people are deficient in, phenylalanine, is that what the medication works on that you know? Do you know, or does it do something different?
Yeah, it can help with phenylephrine, it can help with dopamine, it can also help with adrenaline or epinephrine or norepinephrine as well. So in saying that, I think now that I've given people an idea of what the diagnosis is, and we spoke a bit about misdiagnosis before, saying anxiety disorder is extremely common as being a misdiagnosis, and that is, a key takeaway. But there is also misdiagnosis the other way around as well, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. There's not overdiagnosis, the research shows, but there is misdiagnosis. So some people will be defined as having ADHD when in fact maybe they had PTSD, or as a naturopath would often say, extreme adrenal fatigue, extreme stress, PTSD type symptoms that would also then tend to look like ADHD as well. It's tricky. It's a fine line. It is a really fine line.
It's interesting that, you may have anxiety and be diagnosed with anxiety disorder and it may be ADD, or you may be diagnosed with ADD and it actually could be PTSD. It's interesting, but essentially all of them kind of have a few things in common, which is what you specialize in, which is neurotransmitters, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always look at where are someone's neurotransmitters at. And neurotransmitters, most of them are in the brain, but they're also other places in the body, which makes sense. I mean, take serotonin, for example, a neurotransmitter that we're really familiar with. Yes, it's in the brain, but it's also stored in the gut, because the body is going to release just enough serotonin in the brain in a nice steady stream, ideally. It doesn't always look like this in an individual. So it's really interesting to access where that's at. So phenylephrine, for example, being in the central nervous system, also having an adrenal response. Predominantly, we get it from eating sufficient protein. We're also looking at nutrients like magnesium. Now, speaking on nutrients like protein, like magnesium, iron, zinc, are really important, really good baselines to cover when we're talking about any of those conditions, be it ADHD, be it PTSD or anxiety. The research is really clear. Could people be misdiagnosed with that, but it could just be potentially a deficiency in those nutrients? It's usually more than that. It's not as simple as just a nutrient deficiency. Yeah. Okay. It's not as simple. It is important though, because research is really clear, like magnesium, iron, zinc deficiency is extremely common in ADHD. Research is also clear that magnesium and active B vitamins reduce your risk of PTSD by 75% and also speed up your recovery as well. So nutrients are huge. even in their simplicity, but they're not going to be the cause in and of themselves, and they're certainly not going to be a cure or just all there is to a treatment plan in and of itself as well. I think that that's really important to address. There are certain dietary changes as well that can be really beneficial to people with ADHD. One of them can be, also looking at, do they have any gut issues? Do they have any gut pain? Is this person at risk of celiac disease? Celiac disease can often be a comorbidity that exists with ADHD as well. And that gliadine, that gluten protein, can have a certain effect in that individual's brain, in their thyroid, in their gut, that is going to disrupt those neurotransmitters. So dietary changes can be really important, and nutrients can be really important as well. But often we need to dig a little bit deeper than that as well. Like any health condition, most people have got certain genes and certain susceptibility to developing certain conditions. So in every population of the world, even France, which interestingly enough, in France, there is no ADHD or ADD diagnosis. Doesn't exist at all in France.
Really?
Yes, which is really interesting. Some people are like, well, that's because the whole population would be diagnosed. Have you been to France? Have you seen them in a protest?
That is funny. Yeah. Have you seen the French Revolution?
Yes, hello. Yeah, it wouldn't be a good thing, though. Yeah.
Wow.
But we know that in every population, 3 to 7% of people would have ADD or ADHD. So it is something that's consistent across board, even in France, where they're not going to be medicated. So it's interesting. That condition is always going to be there, and like any gene, you're going to have certain susceptibilities. And then certain things will help switch on a condition as well. So it can be gut infections, it can be trauma, it can be stress. And that's what we know as naturopaths we're always digging for is, yes, we've got this condition and we want to support that as well as we can with the research around, what's going to help you diet-wise, what's going to help you nutrient-wise. There's also, good research even on herbal medicine for ADD and ADHD as well. So standard herbs that we're familiar with, like ginkgo biloba, like rhodiola as well, that help with concentration, help with circulation. The research is really clear that they are really supportive for a lot of ADD and ADHD symptoms, but we're also looking for what really made this individual susceptible. Is it their gut issues? Is it another comorbidity like I mentioned before, celiac disease? Even in PCOS, for example, I'd see an increased risk of ADD as well, because that hormonal disruption that's happening as well has increased their susceptibility to what they already had a predisposition to. And with that diagnosis, as we're seeing more adults diagnosed, they often would have a family history. They often would have had a family member that, if they went and got diagnosed with the checklist, would have had ADD or ADHD themselves, but never received that diagnosis. So family history is usually there. It can just be really tricky. And
yeah, I was going to say, is it run in the family? Like, is it if the dad or the mum or whatever parent has it, or their grandparents or sisters or brothers, does that give the other individual more of a chance of having ADD or ADHD?
Yeah, so, with mental health in general, across board, so all conditions, even atypical depression, even schizophrenia, anxiety disorder, ADD, all the conditions, there is always going to be a genetic component, and that's going to make us more susceptible. And so what can happen is we could see a granddad who's got schizophrenia, for example, has a grandchild who develops anxiety disorder. It was the same gene and the same biochemistry responsible that always made the individual susceptible, but it's not the exact same condition. So that's something to be mindful of well. But ADD and ADHD absolutely do run in families. And because a lot of the older generation weren't diagnosed, it can sometimes make it a bit more difficult to pick up on. It's quite common for now, what we're seeing more is that a child will be diagnosed and at the same time one of their parents is diagnosed that never had a diagnosis before.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's so
really
interesting.
common. The other thing is some of the biochemistry comorbidities that exist with these conditions are hereditary as well and have a really strong genetic link. And one of those would be Pyrrole disorder. So Pyrrole disorder is a condition that affects 1 in 10 people where because they're lacking certain enzymes, their pyrroles become really high, they become deficient in key nutrients like magnesium, zinc and B6, and this produces certain symptoms that make them more susceptible to a lot of mental health issues. And we know if one parent has Pyrrole disorder, it's a 50% chance that that child is going to have Pyrrole disorder as well. And so sometimes, there's other comorbidities and other conditions underneath all the strong genetic links. But the question is always, what switches on these genes? And like we said before, stress, trauma, gut infections all make us more susceptible to switching on genes that we already had.
Yeah, wow. And you've even mentioned Pyrrole disorder, which a lot of individuals might be thinking, I don't know what that is. Monica, is that currently being recognised by psychologists and GPs here in Australia?
So integrative GPs, which are quite common, most people in Australia can find an integrative GP. You will be out of pocket costs, so they're not going to be bulk billing or anything like that. But a lot of integrative GPs will work very similar to the way an integrative naturopath will in terms of their testing, and they would consider Pyrrole disorder testing, which is a urine test. So it's quite a non-invasive test, in that means it's a urine test, but usually it's a test you have to do at home. So, it takes a little bit of work. But for a lot of individuals, if they've got 5 or more symptoms that we'd see in Pyrrole disorder, so that can include being a night owl historically, like even as a kid being like, it was really difficult for me to get to sleep on time and I was dragging myself out of bed in the morning. Mum was like, come on, you've got to get ready for school, and it was really difficult for me. Well, that's a strong Pyrrole disorder symptom. Another one would be having no appetite for breakfast in the morning. Like, I'm just not hungry in the morning. Sometimes I eat breakfast, but I'm forcing myself to. The appetite's not there. Having certain fears and phobias that, don't really make any sense. So, it might be an extreme phobia of spiders, even though they've never hardly even had any interaction.
We live in Australia. There's so many spiders.
There is a lot of spiders, but most of them aren't dangerous. However, some people have a rational fear of spiders. So maybe, I don't want to scare people too much with this.
Don't come to Australia.
But maybe, a spider came through their aircon in their car, or, was in the school, something like that. That's like, okay, then I've had this phobia, and you go, yeah, look, that's fair enough. That'd freak me out a bit too. But when there's a phobia and there's no link to that phobia and it's a bit irrational, that's a strong symptom there of Pyrrole disorder. They could have the white spots on their nails, dry skin, and that low stress tolerance. So the same level of stress that, their sister could have and could deal with quite effectively, they just kind of crumble under. And so it's going, okay.
Yeah.
Pyrrole disorder testing and integrative GPs are pretty onto it. In general, a psychologist is not going to do a lot of testing. They're not going to send you for your blood test. They're not going to do those levels of investigation. They've got enough work to do by themselves generally, just in helping with your thought patterns and, those other practical skills that are really important as well. And which are really important. You can be dealing with your biochemistry, making changes there. But a lot of the time, even as the biochemistry changes, your brain will have developed certain habits, and that's why your psychologist is so important.
Yeah, 100%. And Monica, I love that you mentioned, the Pyrrole disorder. You mentioned potential celiac disease, your potential
Yeah.
gut infections, mineral and vitamin deficiencies, even potential, maybe even brain inflammation, genetics. There's so many things that can be, in line with ADHD when you are, or ADD when you are diagnosed with it. And you've got, I guess, so much investigation to do to figure out what is driving all of this.
Yeah, I think it's not a one size shoe fits all. There are investigations to be done if you really want to know what's happening for you. The great thing is, like I said before, there is over 10,000 different articles in complementary medicine and on ADHD. So we're not in the dark. We're not stabbing in the dark. We don't have to guess. We've got all this great information that, shows always go and get your iron and your zinc tested if you've got ADHD. Absolutely. Make sure gluten's not an issue. Absolutely. Check those basic things first. But it does require investigation, and gut and brain inflammation and healing take time. It's unfortunate. Sometimes I'll get someone's like, I've been on this diet and it's not working. And it's like, you've been on the diet for about 5 seconds. It's going to take a bit longer than that. We're looking at sometimes 6 months of brain and gut inflammation work to really get those good results for people. Often their symptoms might be reducing beforehand, but gut and brain inflammation, realistically for most people, takes about 6 months to heal.
Yeah, wow. And it's worth doing those investigations. Like you said, get your zinc tested, get your magnesium tested, your iron tested, get the celiac gene, see what your microbiota is made out of, how healthy it is or unhealthy it is. Run all of and this is why working with an integrated doctor, a naturopath, another practitioner that may be able to do this for you is beneficial, because it takes all the guesswork and all of that work out of you, because you, as someone who may have ADHD or ADD, your brain is scattered. That's or you're so fatigued. That's one of the last things that you want to do is write yourself a treatment plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, being a specialized naturopath for about a decade now, and I've seen so many people, and often we all wish we had have started working on our health earlier, because once we do, we're like, oh, it makes sense what was happening for me. And it's so much nicer to be able to do my work day and not be extremely fatigued at the end of the day. It's nice to be able to finish projects at home, have all those practical life skills that just increase your quality of life. And in the long term, testing leads to less guessing, like you said, and less guessing means we save money in the long term. We save time, we save money, because we know what we need to focus
100%.
on, and we can go on and thrive. It's really important. Now,
yeah. So, Monica, if someone
got
diagnosed with ADD or ADHD and decided to come and see you, what would that look like? Like, what would that look like for them? Just so the audience gets a bit of an idea what it looks like to see a naturopath for ADHD.
Yeah, absolutely. So some people who see me, they've never seen a naturopath or nutritionist, anyone before, and others have. They've worked with different naturopaths or nutritionists over the years already. So some people have some ideas in their mind and others don't. I predominantly work online these days. So what would happen is someone would book in a consultation. If they've already done any investigations, any work, that would all get sent to me as an email before they book in. I would send them some free mood appraisals to do so that I can gain an idea based on their symptoms of where their neurotransmitters might already be and what they're suffering with and what they look like as an individual. And sometimes that in itself can just be really revealing. then we spend a good hour going through a thorough case study taking and going through all the bodily systems, finding out what's happened for them over their whole life. Yes, they might be like this now, but what were they like as a little kid in primary school? How would their parents have described them? What health conditions have they had over the years that have led them to where they are right now sitting in front of me? And then often they will go away and we will look at some further testing that's individual for them. Maybe they grew up on a farm where there were lots of pesticides, so we're going to do some heavy metal type testing, which is done through the hair to be most accurate more than the blood. Sometimes it could be that microbiome mapping. They've had a lot of gut issues as well, and we know that could be affecting some of those key neurotransmitters that are really going to be important to them. So we're going to go and do that testing. We're not going to do every test that there is. We're going to really focus on them as an individual. Though, like a blood test through standard pathology through your GP is really valuable. Like the blood is living and we know the life is in the blood. The blood goes around to all the organs. And I often describe it to people as like a car that's driving around. And we're driving around in our car, but sometimes we've got to ask ourselves, what's in the boot? What's in the boot? What are we driving around with in the boot? So we know the car's driving, but what's in the car? And so sometimes these other testing that we do through hair, through stool, for urine, like Pyrrole disorders, they tell us what we've actually been driving around with and what's been in the boot. Was it something really stinky and smelly? Was it something really old that we really need to get rid of so that the car can be driving more effectively? That's why testing is really good, and why that blood test that we do for GP gives us a snapshot of where they are in time. We want to look at what's going on, what's being stored in the tissues in the boot, what are some of the other processes that are happening. So that testing is really important. I find my clients, my patients, they don't see me very often. So some naturopaths, they see people every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, because the plan I'm giving someone is so specific. They might only see me every 8 to 10 weeks to start with. And that is fine because their treatment plan is there. That's great. And like I said before, I really encourage people as well to then in between consults with me, see a counsellor sometimes or a psychologist or other allied health professionals, because there's certain habits that we can develop in our thoughts. It can be as simple as we've been running on adrenaline, we've been super stressed, and then we get to a chill part of our life. We're starting to learn to balance our work-life balance, but our brain is still in the habit of being really stressed, even though physically our cortisol is balanced. And so that's why other tactics, other therapies are really important. No one practitioner is going to be your one shop or your one stop. It's really about creating an effective care team behind you so that, everything that you're doing is lining up to get you that best results, which is that optimal functioning, optimal potential for you. We're not trying to get rid of ADHD. We're not trying to, cure it. It's going to be there for you, but you certainly can manage it exceptionally well. And like I said, that book, Finally Focused by James Greenblatt, is always a fantastic place to start if people are going, okay, well, where do I look for what research there is and what's available and what integrative care could look like. It's fantastic.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for sharing that book with us and giving us an in-depth explanation, Monica, of what it will look like to work with a naturopath once being diagnosed with ADHD. And I think it's important for people to understand that, you as a naturopath are able to run tests. You're able to work with GP, psychologists, psychiatrists, whoever it is that they're working with, and have an integrative plan together moving forward. But in addition to that, individuals who may be on medication, like you said earlier at the start of the episode, you're also able to work with them too, because the goal is not to maybe get them off the medication, but to live a healthy lifestyle that they want to live and achieve living with ADHD. So I think that's absolutely amazing. And most people would be like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important because, like I said before, most of those medications don't completely eradicate all the symptoms that they're experiencing. They still need further support. I think it's also really important to acknowledge as well that there can be this mainstream thought of we just need to calm people with ADD and ADHD down. We need to give them calming herbs or calming nutrients, and we just need to calm them down. And that's not the treatment plan that someone's going to get from me. I'm not trying to calm anybody down. They don't need to be calmed down. They just need some support with their focus and with their attention. And so the research on, the herbs that they use and the nutrients aren't focused on calming these individuals down. It's just helping them to function really well.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you put out there, Monica, about being like, let's calm them, let's give them some herbs or supplements or even drugs to calm them. It's like, no, we need to work on the basis of neurotransmitters and balance them and help them focus.
Absolutely. A lot of these people are actually quite calm, that they're not going to be aggressive or, like we said before, they're not going to be running around a room. That they could be like that too. But it's some of those common myths and misconceptions that we have about what ADD and what ADHD looks like. It's most of the time looks like they are so exhausted, especially in women. They can be quite introverted too. You don't have to be this loud extrovert to be having a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD as well. I know plenty of people with ADD that are quite introverted, but before their diagnosis, they really struggled to focus on their tasks. Things took them longer. Assignments would take them a really long time. Work projects would take them a really long time. That level of detail was really hard for them. And so know that weren't some loudmouth, and we didn't need to calm them down, that their brain was struggling with that focus, with that attention. And some of them are the most amazing people. Like I said earlier, they can be really educated and extremely capable and able to be really creative, really fast with their ideas and really adaptable to change, where some of us are like, oh, we like our routine and we have to stick like that. And
yeah,
they can
on that
be
note,
really adaptable. Yeah.
Yeah, women with ADHD, the strength that you said that they might give is be successful, be adaptable. What else? Because there must be, with everything that comes with it, they think fast. Like, what else is there, Monica, that their strength and they can excel and have a unique perspective to success?
Yeah, they can often be extremely successful because they're people who are capable of thinking outside of the box. And when we say outside of the box, we just mean the box society has given us, where the rest of us, we like to go along with the procedures, the policies, what's inbuilt around us. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's also really helps our society function. But these people can be extremely successful because they're like, hold on, I'm collaborating all these different thoughts and lots of information at once, and maybe I'm not looking at them all in detail, but I'm getting a broader picture. So they have a lot of strengths, like you said, that we really just want to encourage. We want to excel. We want to support them in so that they're using their strengths to be extremely successful, which I know a lot of ADD and ADHD women that are very successful. They can be CEOs of big companies because all the shite that happens with that, they're like, yeah, I'll ride with that. That's fine. They can be lots of fun too. So lots of strengths, lots of great things. So not the stigma of the naughty little boy. I would like to see, more of a society impression of ADD and ADHD women as being extremely creative, extremely empowering, able to be really creative. And yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, what a beautiful way to give a positive view about women with ADHD or ADD. And it's like, if they can be so successful with their brain potentially not being able to focus as much, wow, imagine if they work with someone to assist their brain to focus, assist their neurotransmitters to balance. It's like, wow, like if you were able to adapt to the way your brain functions at the moment, imagine if we can put a little bit more of a spin to it and point it to a little bit of a direction of more focus, what else could happen, which I think is extraordinary. Monica, some practical tips for the audience who may have ADHD, the women out there who are listening, or even men, but that might be like, you know what, I may have ADHD or ADD. If you could give them 3 tips or practical tips, what would they be, Monica?
One is that you're going to have to really watch your fatty acid profile. So that looks like 2 things. It looks like, 1, increasing your EPA and your DHA. So that can be either from a really clean fish oil or an algal oil, depending on your diet. Now, fish oil will still contain more EPA or DHA than algal oil. Algal oil is the algae that the fish eat to get their EPA or DHA. But different diets, different people, they're both available, and they can be a fantastic supplement if you've got ADD or ADHD, because you're going to have an increased need for those omega-3 fatty acids. And then that also means reducing your intake of inflammatory oils and fatty acids as well. So avoiding cooking in seed oils, avoiding foods that cook in seed oils. I mean, it takes about 24 cups of brown rice to make 1 or 2 tablespoons of rice bran oil. You can see that for someone who's already got a sensitive fatty acid profile, that could be quite a metabolic storm for them. So cook with olive oil, use small amounts of organic butter or ghee. Go that way. Avoid takeaway foods that have a lot of seed oils and foods that are cooked in a lot of seed and vegetable oils as well. And don't just supplement with an algae or a fish oil, but increase your omega-3 foods as well. So that can be really clean fish a couple of times a week. That could be chia seeds as a chia pudding. These are fantastic foods. So my number 1 tip is focus on your fatty acid profile. It's so important, and that in itself will take you really far. Secondly, it is absolutely looking at gluten. If you change nothing else in your diet and you try nothing else, consider doing the testing first for celiac disease or gluten intolerance. You don't have to have celiac disease to have an issue with gluten. Australian GPs in general are not fantastic with celiac disease. It's more commonly diagnosed in countries like Finland or Northern European countries, where, believe it or not, they're way more on top of it than we are. And that's because they will diagnose through genetic testing and blood testing, and they don't require an endoscopy like we do, tend to, like in Australia. So look at whether gluten is a problem, and if you're going, okay, I don't know how to eat, I don't know what else to change about my diet, and I'm having these issues, look at gluten. Number 1, go there. That's where we want to go. My 3rd tip, and this is for everybody, is slow down sometimes. We do too much as women in this society. We put so much pressure on ourselves, whether we've got ADD, whether we've got no diagnosis of anything. We put too much pressure on ourselves. We don't balance according to our hormones. We don't resticize. We don't learn to do walking in nature. We don't learn to do things like infrared saunas, which are fantastic at helping with cortisol levels. We don't do single-minded tasks where, we're looking for seashells like we used to do as a kid, where when you're looking for a seashell, all you're doing is looking for a seashell. You're not doing anything else. And sometimes it's slowing down, focusing on simple-minded tasks, and that goes for everybody. So they're my number 3 tips for anyone with ADD, anyone with ADHD, and also really beneficial for all of us to look into.
Yeah, that's amazing. So 1, the fatty acid profile. 2, the gluten, and 3, like you said, rest, exercise, rest, and might be mindful. I love that. What great practical tips for individuals who may have ADD or ADHD or recently been diagnosed and are like, I don't know what to do. But now you have so many options. And I mean, we only spoke about so many things. We could have spoken about so much more information in more detail. But I guess this podcast was just to plant a seed potentially for individuals who may have ADD or ADHD, and just let them know that there are other options, like being in touch with a naturopath, like looking at genetics, and so forth. So Monica, your brain has so much information about this topic, and I love that you were able to share that with us today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out and sharing your knowledge on ADD and ADHD.
No, thank you so much. And yeah, I really hope that this podcast really helps a lot of women. If you're exhausted, if you think, you've been anxious in the past and something's still not quite right, I really encourage you to go and do some further investigation and seek further help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monica. In the show notes, I'll put all the information so people can contact you, jump on your Instagram, on your website, and get in touch with you if that's something that they wish to do. I really appreciate your time on the Natural Health Podcast. And remember, thank you for joining us on the Natural Health Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health. Content and information provided here is opinion of Mahela Raguse and is for information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is not intended to provide medical advice or take the place of medical advice or any current treatment you're undertaking. Consult your own medical professionals for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the Natural Health Podcast. It is advised that you consult your doctor or healthcare professional in relation to any health concerns you may be having. Mahela Raguse does not take responsibility for any health consequences which occur from a person listening, viewing, or reading this content. And in the circumstances shall the Natural Podcast, Mahela Raguse, any guests or contributors to the Natural Podcast, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of Mahela Raguse be responsible for damages arising from the information provided on the Natural Podcast. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical conditions in either yourself or others. Please note, if you're taking prescription, do not stop your medication or start a new protocol, including but not limited to supplements, diet, lifestyle changes without consulting a doctor or healthcare professional. If you or any person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical advice. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have read or heard on the Natural Podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. Neither Mahela Raguse nor the publisher of this content takes responsibility for the possible health consequences of any person or persons reading or listening or following the information in the educational content.